Exercise TasmanLink is abandoned for good.
We don't want any more destruction of this area. This land has suffered enough, and in turn it's making us, the Aboriginal people, suffer. And, you know, we're not going to allow it to happen anymore. That's it.
While helicopters and ground teams began a search for the demonstrators, some of the aircraft and soldiers destined for the week-long exercise began arriving at HMAS Albatross at nearby Nowra. With the first of the live firing not scheduled until midday tomorrow, Navy chiefs hope the bombing range could be cleared in time to avoid serious disruption.
If we find them, and they won't go when we ask them to do so, then if it's established that they have been breaking the law or are breaking the law, then we'd ask the civil police to act accordingly.
The protesters know that in this fight they had the ultimate weapon, the power of bluff. For as long as they continue to claim there are people hiding on the range, even if those claims are untrue, the firing can't begin. Tonight, urged on by other Aboriginal groups, the protesters have vowed to remain on the firing range. The Navy, meanwhile, says it'll continue its search and decide tomorrow if the exercise will still go ahead. Russell Bishop, National 9 News.
Firing range. Others set out to hide out in the scrub. Today's joint military exercise was cancelled while helicopters searched the range for the elusive protesters. Organisers say they have enough food and water to last until Friday.
And with all that activity, it's appropriate that today is World Environment Day.
The Army, Navy and Air Force prepared for their annual TasmanLink exercise today, but operations were hampered by the protesters. 9 people have hidden in the bush at the Beecroft Peninsula, set aside for bombardment by the Defence Forces. They want to stop defence activities in the area and establish a national park.
We're not going to allow it to happen anymore. That's it. No more bombing on Beecroft Peninsula.
Navy helicopters searched the wild terrain, but to no avail.
And if we're not certain that the area is clear, then clearly we are unable to fire.
The Jervis Bay National Campaign Office says it will take 2 years for the environment to recover from the military onslaught. The search for the protesters will continue tomorrow. Organisers say the groups have enough provisions for a week.
So fragile.
At first light this morning, Navy helicopters searched the range, which is listed on the National Estate, for signs of the elusive protesters. Another group of local Aborigines camped in the open was removed by police and taken to Jervis Bay. But the 5 were not charged and returned to the protest vigil outside the range later in the afternoon.
They just don't want to put themselves in a position where they have to charge Aboriginal people for being on their own land.
Despite continued attempts to find the hidden group, the Navy had to accept a ceasefire, halting the week-long TasmanLink exercise. In Canberra, the Australian Democrats threw their weight behind the campaign, threatening to walk out of the Senate if the bombardment went ahead.
Well, we'll continue to press that the area is made a national park, obviously, and that it's kept free of this sort of exercise.
The protesters say they will continue to disrupt firing until the Navy abandons both the range and its plans for expansion at Jervis Bay.
Despite 3 days of helicopter sweeps and intensive searching, the 12,000 TasmanLink exercise troops have found little more than wildlife on the range. And the mouse roared a little louder today when another 20 demonstrators advocating local land rights took on the military. Armed only with their passive tactics, the column of demonstrators infiltrated the Beecroft target range to confront their disarmed opponents.
Don't be confrontationist, just tell them to leave the area and then walk away, as long as they've been warned.
After an hour, the federal police were sent in to herd the protesters away. But at a cost of nearly $3 million, the TasmanLink exercises have been all but grounded. And the red-faced military has had to accept a ceasefire.
We haven't been able to do the live firings, and anyone with a knowledge of these exercises would know that that's the litmus test of what it is that you've been doing.
With the protesters vowing to remain hidden until the exercises finish on Friday, the military is now in a reluctant full retreat.
Protesters at Jervis Bay are celebrating a win for the environment tonight after successfully disrupting the $3 million military exercise TasmanLink. 1,200 soldiers abandoned the Beecroft Peninsula bombing range last night, and today the last of 9 demonstrators emerged from their hiding places in the target area.
For the 1,200 troops of exercise TasmanLink, the only enemy in their sights for a week were the elusive protesters. Late yesterday, a battle-ready acting Defence Minister failed to draw out the remaining protesters, instead conceding the exercise was all but lost.
It's a bit like someone with a birthday cake. They really haven't had the opportunity to blow out the candles.
As the sun set on what became an exercise in frustration, the demoralised troops abandoned their South Coast outpost. This morning, news of the early retreat was greeted with celebrations in the demonstrators' camp.
Victory to the environment!
By mid-afternoon, the remaining 3 protesters emerged from hiding. Some had camped out since Sunday on rocky ledges below the 4,000-hectare range after they'd eluded 5 days of extensive searching. And tonight, the demonstrators say the fight for Jervis Bay. They want the range closed down and turned into a national park.
A Navy bombing exercise on the New South Wales south coast tonight remains little more than a surveillance mission because Aboriginal protesters remain hidden in the target zone. 5 Aborigines were picked up this morning, but their supporters claim several others remain on the Beecroft Range, which they say contains sacred sites.
Bombing practice was due to get underway on the Beecroft Range near Jervis Bay at midday, but Navy ships could do little more than patrol impatiently offshore, waiting for an all-clear.
It should be borne in mind that this exercise costs the taxpayer an awful lot of money. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars, and for every hour and every day that it remains suspended as it is at the moment, then the taxpayer is the one who's suffering.
More than a dozen Aborigines made their way onto the range yesterday, claiming the exercise could threaten sacred sites. Their supporters are also opposed to the Navy's planned move to Jervis Bay from Sydney. While the Navy disputes that any sacred sites are in danger, Aboriginal leaders are delighted with the effect of their protest.
Bloody oath I am. This should have happened years ago.
5 Aborigines were easily picked up by police near their tent headquarters, but they managed to convince Navy authorities that another 7 were still in the 4,600-hectare range, and TasmanLink remains little more than a large game of hide and seek.
It's not something we do lightly, occupying a bombardment range. It's not something you do in a casual way. It's a very carefully planned operation, and we take the campaign very seriously.
Protesters tonight is still holding the might of our armed services at bay. Police arrested and removed 5 Aborigines from the Jervis Bay naval site today, but there are claims that other protesters are hiding out in the area, and they've delayed a planned military bombardment.
The arrests follow the infiltration of Beecroft Naval Bombardment Range yesterday. 5 members of the Geringer community had openly set up camp, other protesters reportedly going to ground in heavy bush. Their aim, to prevent a 5-day multi-million-dollar Trans-Tasman Armed Services exercise, destroying what they say are sacred sites. And to date, they're delighted with their success.
Bloody oath I am. This should have happened years ago.
However, the Navy believes Aborigines are being used by anti-base groups.
And there are no sacred sites in the target area that we fire at. There is one sacred site called the Drum and Drumsticks, which we no longer use and haven't used for years.
For the past 2 days, instead of shelling Beecroft Peninsula, the Army, Navy and Air Force have been looking for the remaining protesters, and they now suspect they're not even there.
There clearly are people in there, there's no question of that. The Navy believes that we have the 7 people in there, we've given them their names.
Today in the Senate, the acting Defence Minister gave an assurance not one shot would be fired until he was 150% certain that no one remained on site. Those arrested today were released without charge. Kay Brown.
Between the armed forces and Aborigines for control of a bombing range at Jervis Bay on the New South Wales south coast continues, delaying a planned military exercise. While several people remain hidden on the range, about 20 protesters today walked into the area, defying the military and police.
Just walk around them and just... As the protesters were being briefed about what to do once they entered the range, they suddenly suspected that spies were among their midst.
I asked if you were in the Navy. He said, no, I'm ex-Navy. I left the Navy. I used to be in the Navy.
Well, I'm on leave at the moment and I'm an interested resident and I have a right to be here because I am concerned...
Oh, no, don't question your right to be here, just a question of your right to deceive us. And who are you?
Oh, well, hang on.
Are you a serving naval officer?
Sorry?
Are you a serving naval officer?
Yes, I am.
Fine, well, we should have
The Navy personnel explained their presence off camera, apparently to the satisfaction of the protesters who'd let them tag along. But once at the range perimeter, the interlopers felt discretion was the better part of valour and decided to remain behind. The demonstrators included local Aborigines who want the land to become part of the national estate, but the Army is holding on to it.
I have to advise you that you are trespassing on Commonwealth ground, and I ask you to leave the Commonwealth ground immediately.
Well, we're just out for a walk, a peaceful walk.
A small contingent of police was landed on the range by Army helicopter and eventually convinced the protesters to leave peacefully. Meanwhile, 7 people remain hidden on the range, costing the military hundreds of thousands of dollars by delaying a joint bombing exercise with New Zealand forces. Chris Castellari, SBS News.